Welcome to the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction podcast.
Hello, welcome back to the podcast. Today we are bringing you a bit of a fun episode as part of the launch for our new anthology series, Romantic Fantasy Short Stories, because next month we will be releasing the very first two books, A Breath of Time and Of Love and Dragons. You'll probably know that we publish a lot of horror, sci-fi and dark fantasy, so we're very excited to be taking on this new project where we're putting romance front and centre. We really can't wait, which means that we're giving you, our lovely podcast listeners, a bit of a sneak peek at the stories inside. In this episode we're highlighting A Breath of Time, which is a collection that pits love and lovers against the greatest adversary of all, time. Don't worry, dragon lovers, we will be featuring Of Love and Dragons 2 weeks from now. Our story for today is Stitching Time by AnaMaria Curtis. It's a tale of two lovers who meet across two different timelines. The man, who is of course tall, dark and handsome, and the woman who possesses the ability to weave time, have this bond that grows as they search for a way to tie their lives together. Before we dive in, AnaMaria has sent us a short introduction to give you a taste of the world she's created.
Hi everyone, my name is AnaMaria Curtis. I'm a writer from the United States, specifically the rural part of Illinois. I am the winner of the 2019 Dell Magazine's Award and the LeVar Burton Reads Origins and Encounters contest, and my short fiction has been published in magazines including Clarkesworld, Uncanny, and Strange Horizons. I'm a big fan of Open Skies, Fictional Longing, and Jane Austen, and you can find more of my work or the link to my newsletter at AnaMariaCurtis.com. My story in the Flame Tree anthology is called Stitching Time, and it's about falling in love with someone you never even should have been able to meet. It's also about the depth of an older sister's love and a really impressive sewing needle. A fun fact about this story is that I actually wrote the first draft of it the same night that I turned in my grad school thesis. Brainstorming the story had been my way of keeping calm as I finished writing the thesis, so once I had actually submitted my final draft at about 9 p.m., I thought, hey, what better way to celebrate than to finish a short story? So for me, the inspiration for this story was about finding a way to balance the romantic and familial loves at the heart of the story, figuring out how to make two characters fall in love with time and even death against them. But it was also about having something fun to focus on and write about. I stayed up until about 3:30 in the morning, finishing that very first draft, and the rush of writing something so much fun after so long, maybe it felt a little bit like falling in love.
And now, here is Stitching Time, read by Sabrina Robinson.
Stitching Time by AnaMaria Curtis. Irialyn Eldentry was 17 the first time she was invited to the second Duke of Correct Behavior's manor house in the off-season, when the petals and the ash from the bonfires mingled in the air of the city. There was no blood in the air that summer, for which she was grateful, but the open air of the country was a relief all the same. Even better was the library in the late afternoons, when most people had retreated to their rooms or to intimate little clusters in various sitting rooms, to which Irialyn, too young and too willing to venture an opinion on things she knew little about, was not invited. The library had soft leather seats and big bay windows that looked out onto the lawn of the manor. On the third day after arriving, Irialyn finally found the interesting books, a small shelf of new mysteries tucked behind a larger and much more imposing shelf of astronomical observations. She happily plucked the latest installment in her favorite series off this shelf and settled into the curve of the nearest window without noticing that she was not alone in the room. In fact, it wasn't until she was halfway through the novel and regretfully aware that she ought to begin thinking of going upstairs to change for dinner that she saw him. A long, lean, scholarly type, hunched over one of the books that had undoubtedly come from a prominent shelf. and probably held scientific observations of plant anatomy or something equally puzzling. He had a pen and a small notebook where he was clearly jotting down observations. Now that she was looking at him, Irialyn realized that they somehow hadn't been introduced. It wasn't a large gathering at the Duke's manor, just 4 or 5 families, all of whom had been known to her for years, though she was only just officially out. This man had dark coloring and the long, sharp nose of the Duke, and the thick, even eyebrows of the late Duchess. But Irialyn felt certain she'd never seen him before. She would have remembered that face. A cousin, surely a near cousin, for the resemblance was strong. He must have been newly arrived. Irialyn was conscious of her manners. She would wait to be introduced at dinner. But she hit her elbow against the window standing up to leave, and the young man looked up, caught her gaze, and immediately fell to his knees, bowing his head. "I beg of you," he said, his voice low, "do not speak." Irialyn shivered. The timbre of his voice was clear and strong. She did as he asked. She did not speak. Finally, he looked up, and the look on his face was wretched, abject. He was a picture of misery. "It was not right, what happened to you," he said. "I mourned you, as did the city, though none of us could show it." Irialyn stared at him, frozen. What in the world was he talking about? As far as she knew, nothing worse than 2 dances with her second cousin Dromley had befallen her in the last few months. In the face of such strangeness, she did what she often castigated her mystery novel heroines for not doing. She fled. Irialyn recovered her bravery after dinner, glazed venison and carrots, with a pavlova with lemon curd for dessert to really bolster her spirits, and crept back down to the library before she could be ushered to bed. There was laughter down the hall, and as she rounded the corner to the library doors, her elder sister, Sariel, emerged from the other side. Sariel had always been the beautiful one, with piles of warm brown hair, clear rosy skin, and bright green eyes. Irialyn knew that they were only entertaining the visit with the Duke's family because her father thought Sariel might catch the eye of his heir, or, if they were lucky, the Duke himself. That, at least, was not a fate she envied. "What are you doing?" Sariel whispered, seeing her. "You ought to be in bed." "I want to finish my book." "You're not meeting someone in the library, I hope," Sariel sighed. "You have to be careful, you know. The Duke's family is in the house of correct behavior." "I didn't agree to meet anyone," Irialyn said, which was true. "Come on, then," Sariel said, and followed her to the door. The young man was in the library again, or perhaps still, for he hadn't been at dinner after all. He looked up when Irialyn entered, but she avoided his gaze, heading to the spot where she'd left her book. "You didn't think I would move it, did you?" he said. She couldn't see him, focused on the book in her hands, but there was a smile in his voice, something warm. She blushed, waiting for her sister to comment on her lie, on the beautiful young man addressing her with such familiarity. But when she turned, her sister was standing in the doorway, gazing at her own reflection in the window, completely in her head. "Well," Sariel said finally, seeming to snap out of her own reverie, "you have your book? Make sure the light's out by the time I come up, please. There's talk of a phoenix hunt tomorrow, so the household will be up early." "Of course," Irialyn said, drifting toward the door. She kissed her sister on both cheeks. "Good night." She leaned against the outside of the library doors, pretending to be absorbed in her book, until her sister had rounded the corner. Then, of course, she went back inside. "Why didn't my sister notice you?" The young man looked up from his book. "Who?" "The woman who was with me just now." He frowned. "I didn't know you had a sister." "Of course I do. She's usually a lot more observant." "Lucky us." Irialyn narrowed her eyes. "You don't mind me speaking now? What changed?" He smiled. a slow unfurling of amusement across his face, masking something dark. "I've decided I don't believe in ghosts." Allen sat in the chair across from him, close enough that she could reach out and nudge him with the toe of her slipper, if she wanted to. She didn't do it, of course, but she did want to. "I'm not a ghost." "Sure you are." "I'm not. I've never died. Ask anyone." He closed his book. "What's your name?" "Allen Aldentry, of the House of Memory." She wrinkled her nose. "A distant branch through my mother's line." "Yes," he said. "That's what I thought." "And are you the same Allen Aldentry who walked in the King's Gardens 4 months ago? Who killed one of his birds, however accidentally, only days after your debut?" He gestured to the window, where of course nothing but their reflection was visible. "Is it not your blood in the ash that flows from the Capitol this season?" Allen sat back, head swimming. She opened her mouth, swallowed, tried again. "I'm not," she said. "I'm not. I never walked in the King's Gardens. I meant to, a few months ago, but Sariel asked me to stay in and help her with something, and I never got another chance." Now the man across from her was speechless. He stared at her, and there was something raw and powerful behind his eyes, something so strong that Allen could not look away. Grief, hope, longing. He stared at her for so long, in fact, that Allen began to recover her own courage. "If I'm not that Allen," she said, "then who are you?" His jaw shut with a click. He took a deep breath through his nose. "You don't know who I am?" It was the first time that beautiful voice had sounded flat to Allen. She shook her head. "I am Royden Marcinius," he said finally, his voice rough, "the second son of the lord of this house." Allen blinked at him. "But you're dead. You've been dead for almost 10 years. He blinked back at her. The absurdity of the situation wrote itself across his strong features just as it rolled through Allen's mind. They broke into laughter at the same time. On impulse, Allen reached across the table to take his hand. He drew back, but not quickly enough. Her palm met the air above the back of his hand like a jolt of lightning to a yearly sacrifice. It was like nothing she'd experienced before, the jolt and the pain and the not-quite feel of his skin. Her palm itched into the night. The next day, most of the party did go hunting, heading out in a clamor of spears and flame-warded shields and high, bright bells. Allen's riding skills were poor enough that she was excused as a matter of course. She ventured back to the library in Royden, and they curled up in cozy leather chairs in a secluded reading nook and built each other explanations. Royden was 22, and he'd never learned to ride. He was near to finishing his studies at the University of the Full Court, which required a great deal of travel between the various seasons. He expected to do well on his examinations and hoped to earn a place in the summer court working for the House of Glass, so that his father could not obligate him to come back and work for the House of Correct Behavior. The House of Glass had lost many of their officers during the plague. "A plague?" she asked, horrified. "We didn't have a plague." So he thought he had a good chance. At this, he looked up at her, smiling a sideways smile Allen had begun to get used to. "I have good prospects," he told her, and she looked back down at her hands, unable to speak. He told her very little about her own family. It clearly pained him to speak of her. "We were friends," was all he could say, tracing the wood grain of the table with his left hand. "I thought, but everything happened very quickly. It was an accident. Even the king knew it was an accident, I think. But the rules had been written." For a second, Allen wanted to reach for his hand again. This time she stopped herself. The night before they were due to depart, Allen turned in her narrow bed toward the side of the room where Sariel lay. and asked if she could borrow the needle. It was still dark, moonlight glancing over everything like the gilding at the temple, and she could only see Sariel's temple, the bridge of her nose, and the soft jut of her cheekbone. "You're sure?" Sariel asked quietly. "I've been thinking about it. Do you need my help?" "Have you ever used it?" Silence. Iriellen thought about the way the Duke's cousin had smiled at Sariel at dinner, the way the Duke's eyes had passed over her. She wouldn't know if Sariel had used it. And her sister was 21. She would have plenty of opportunities. "Yes," Sariel said finally. "Yes, I've used it. And yes, you can borrow it. Be careful and don't tell anyone." Anyone meant anyone. As Iriellen had told Royden, she was from a very distant part of the House of Memory, on her mother's side. The house was an illustrious house, with many favorite objects. There was one that had gone missing so long as to become more legend than object, the needle that stitched time together. The great queen had used it to rescue her most beloved courtier 3,000 years ago. Her granddaughter, regent of the Autumn Court at the time, had used it to bring the islands back from the oceans. Not even a millennium ago, the great sorcerer of the missing continents had used it to cast the faithless few from the land, unwriting their very existence so that the songs only spoke of them in absence and riddles without an answer. And then it had disappeared. Disappeared, as it happened, into the hands of Iriellen's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, passed down daughter to daughter, aunt to niece, and never spoken of except over piles of embroidery, which they were all uncommonly good at. They mostly used it to guarantee good marriages, as Iriellen understood it, stitched together good outcomes for favored suitors, or manipulated timelines so that any suitors they sought to avoid would pass them over as well. Anything bigger than that could draw attention. Anything bigger than that was dangerous. At first, Iriellen used the needle to stitch little pockets between time where they could exchange letters. This was a great comfort when the drought hit. She wrote to Royden of failing crops, of a land so dry that the air sparkled with the potential of violence well before the season for bonfires and sacrifices. "There is water for the greenhouses," she wrote him, "but little for the grain. The rivers are dry, the lakes are low, the wells are empty. The House of Abundance proclaims every day that they are arranging trade with the other seasons, but so far nothing comes. The king has even shut up the gardens. There is no water for the flowers even in the center of the summer court." "I know you won't remember the plague," he replied. "You won't remember the days after the plague then either, and for that I almost pity you, when the infection ceased and the dead were buried, and the flowers bloomed and were not needed for the medicines. We braided garlands of them, for the temples, for the throne of the king, for every loved one we still had. I threw a wreath of marigolds around my brother's neck. I swear to you, the flowers will bloom again." The promised supplies from the other seasons did come, and one day, finally, so did the rains. Thick, heavy sheets of rain, like the sky was giving everything it had withheld all at once. Iriellen dragged Sariel out into the streets of the city, where everyone was standing, shouting, reveling in it. The sisters joined in, holding each other around the upper arm, jumping and screaming up into the sky. They stayed out long after the street lights turned off, long after the first wave of people had gone back inside. Their dresses were plastered around them, drenched and heavy and mildly itchy, and it didn't matter. Sariel wrapped her arms around Iriellen. "I'm so glad," she muttered into Iriellen's shoulder. I'm so glad. It was 3 years after they'd met before Iriellen and Royden could see each other again. It was hard to match their lives to each other, like fitting pieces from two different puzzles together. But through their letters, they managed to find a few places of overlap that were relatively sparsely populated. There was a public fountain across from the public offices of the House of Glass, surrounded by benches. Various family members and friends often waited there, while people shopped in the stores circling out from around the fountain. So it was easy enough for Ariellen to find a reason to be sitting on the bench, facing due east, in the hour before sunset. She watched the passerby, took note of a bag going missing, and clutched her own, and then looked up into his face. It had been 3 years. They had had letters. The letters were not enough. His eyes were steady on hers, dark and glossy with tears the longer she looked at him. Something was twisting and knotting in Ariellen's chest, a complicated, shaking thing. It had been there the whole time, she was realizing. She took in the line of his nose, the sharp edge of his jaw, the even, thick brows, the slight sideways curve of his smile. It was all very dear to her. "It's really you," he said. "I thought perhaps I'd made it up." She smiled helplessly. "Me too." He pressed a handkerchief into her hands, and the fabric shivered slightly under her fingers. The time transference, she thought, pressing it into her wet cheeks. She wondered if he would try to touch her, if it would still feel like a shock. "Sit," she told him, and he did. "Your letters," he said after a long moment. His voice was rough, but still that pleasant low timbre. She had tried to remember it, reading his words, but it was better than she had thought. They'd been like a breeze through a still hot day. Even when you wrote to me of the drought, it was beautiful to know you were alive somewhere, writing to me. The words pressed against a thought Ariellen had often had, but never found a way to ask in the letters. "Royden," she said, "what were we to each other, where we were, before I died?" "Friends," he said. "You were young. I was young. But I always thought, if I did well in the examinations, if I got that post in the House of Glass." She nodded. "I'll never have those memories, you know. I'll never be the friend you had and lost." His voice was thick when he replied, "I know. But the same things I loved about her, I love about you. The jokes you make, the tiny mole under your left eye you always complain about, the way you turn to me as though I have the solution when one of your books ends badly. But there are things I only know about you that I never knew about her. I love the way you write your G's with an extra loop, you know, and you always draw a different flower at the corner of your letters depending on what's in bloom outside your window. You tell me what you think more, too. Of course, I wish you hadn't died, but I wish you hadn't died," Ariellen said. "I wish I had been your friend when we were younger. I'm sure you were delightful." She looked down at her gloved hand on the bench between them. "Can I? It'll hurt. It'll hurt either way." The shock lit her up from inside out this time. She closed her eyes against the wave of pain, the edge of wrongness, and kept her hand where it was, until the sensation simmered down to a constant sort of buzz. Disconcerting and, yes, unpleasant, but not unbearable. As she looked down at their two hands, he flipped his palm over slowly, maintaining contact the whole time, and wrapped his fingers around hers. "I've been thinking," Ariellen wrote to him a few days later. "What if there was a way to bring you over to my world? Would you want that?" The reply was a single word. Yes. It wasn't that simple. Of course it wasn't that simple. To bring him into her timeline, she would have to bring enough of his universe that he would also have a family that recognized him, his position at the House of Glass. It all got that much harder when he sent another letter. "Dearest," it began, "I don't know how to tell you this, but in my timeline, your sister died in the plague. I never met her. I didn't even know she existed until I asked around after meeting you. This you. Anything you do, and I don't know what you're contemplating or what's in your power, don't let that be something I bring with me. I would hate for you to lose something to gain me. You will always have me, even if it's only ever from here. Irialan stared at this letter for so long she feared she might set fire to it with her eyes, as her aunt had once done with a letter from an ex-lover. But the paper only grew creased and slightly damp in her grasp. Royden had lived, and her sister had died, and she, eventually, had died as well. Royden had died, and her sister had lived, and so had she. They stood across an impossible gap. Irialan reread the letter. She didn't know what was in her power either. Serial announced her engagement to the head of the House of State to Irialan by tackling her into her bed as they were getting ready for dinner one evening. It had been almost 2 years since Irialan had seen Royden and started her preparations. Serial had never asked for the needle back. "I'm so happy," Serial said into Irialan's shoulder, repeatedly poking Irialan's spleen with her elbow in her excited wriggling. "I really am. It's all I wanted. It's what I waited for. I didn't have to change anything at all." The next 3 months passed like a slow nightmare. Irialan helped Serial with wedding preparations. The dress, the trousseau, the fire dancers, an endless checklist, and wrote to Royden and tried to understand how she could hold the happiness of 2 people in her palms and not let it drop. The thing was, time wasn't like a linen or a cotton that Irialan could embroider beautiful, complicated dreams on, so long as her hand moved true and sure. The warp and the weft never lined up the same way twice. There were gaps where there ought not to be. Instead of fabric, perhaps time was better visualized as a river of threads, clumping and bunching and tying themselves together in chunks, drifting apart in others. Irialan was on one strand of thread, reaching out to snag the thread Royden was on every now and then, hoping it didn't get lost the longer they spent apart. She had the needle. She could bind the 2 threads, but at what cost? "I miss you," Royden wrote. "A lightning dancer came to court yesterday, and I reached my hand out and nearly touched his shoulder before one of my companions knocked my hand away. It wouldn't have been the same as touching you, I know, but I find myself yearning for lightning nonetheless." "I want you to be happy," Serial told Irialan one night when she'd snuck in and asked to brush Irialan's hair in the place of her maid while she still could. "That's all that matters to me. You know that, don't you?" She stroked the back of Irialan's head almost absent-mindedly. "I hope you don't resent me." Irialan didn't quite know where this was coming from. Marriage must be making her emotional, or perhaps it was the fractiousness of the court. The king was in a temper. The house of fire was feasting. On days that ash and blood wafted by the window, Irialan stayed inside and worked on the problem. She wrote to Royden and asked him questions, asked him for details she'd never considered before, trying to understand what separated the worlds in which each of them had been allowed to live. In his, Royden had never learned to ride, having taken a dislike to horses at an early age. There had been a plague when he was young, in which Serial had died. At the age of 17, Irialan had gone walking in the king's garden and, most unfortunately, tripped over an ailing bird, snapping its neck with her heel in the presence of 4 witnesses. For this, she had been condemned to the fires. In hers, Royden had died in a riding accident as a child. There had been no plague, and Serial had not died, but there had been a drought. Irialan had lived a mostly happy life. She had never visited the king's gardens. Irialan thought about this last difference while waiting for her sister to return from the dressmaker so they could have lunch. She was curled in a nook in the informal sitting room, nearly finished with the embroidery. Pink roses, meant as a gift for Serial, but the needle went loose in her fingers when the thought struck her. Why had she not gone to the King's Gardens after all? She had been quite set on it, she remembered. But Sariel had insisted that she stay in, that she help with some piece of embroidery Sariel meant to take to a friend. When Irialan had insisted, indignant, Sariel had actually raised her voice at her. Irialan had been too annoyed to notice at the time, but now... What had Sariel said the other night? I hope you don't resent me. Irialan looked down at the needle in her hand. Sariel had used the needle once, before she'd given it to Irialan, but she hadn't gotten engaged until years later. She hadn't used the needle on a suitor at all. This didn't fix Irialan's problem, of course, only made her feel more guilty about it. Sariel had saved her, and here she was contemplating something that might risk Sariel, so that she might have Royden. It felt like betrayal of the highest order, incorrect behavior. She could almost feel the flames. It didn't occur to her until the night before Sariel's wedding. She crept into Sariel's room, the light of her candle wavering in the breeze from the window, the needle tucked into her sash. Sariel sat up immediately, not even pretending to have been asleep. What is it? She whispered. Were you ever going to tell me? The candle illuminated the edges of Sariel's face, her round cheeks, the red gleam in her brown hair, the way her lips opened on an O as she understood what Irialan meant. Sariel opened her arms, and Irialan set the candle on the nightstand and crawled into them. I didn't want you to feel as though you owed me something, she said finally. Okay, Irialan said into the quiet of the room. Thank you. She let Sariel wrap her hands around her. Then she broke the silence again. I had an idea, but I need your help. Go on, Sariel muttered into her hair. Irialan told her about the timelines, the way the three of them never all survived, how she'd finally worked out that she'd lived because Sariel lived, but that didn't bring back Royden, who she missed, who she longed for. Sariel's arms tightened around her in silent sympathy. I was thinking, Irialan finally said, that if you could do the stitching, if you wield the needle, maybe it won't be able to unmake you. She could hear Sariel's smile in her voice. If I make it, it can't unmake me. Exactly, because in the unmaking, it too would be undone. Sariel straightened, and Irialan sighed in relief. She hadn't really been worried Sariel would refuse her, but it was no small thing she was asking. Light the lamp, Sariel said. Let's do it now. You're sure? I've always had a steady hand. Plus, I want to be here when it happens, Sariel grinned. This way I can chaperone. Irialan lit the lamp, pulled out the needle, held it in the air, unwilling to snag it on anything until she was sure she needed to. Together, Sariel said. She wrapped her hand around Irialan's and pulled the thread. It took him another 3 hours to find them once the threads were bound together, but he was rapping on the front door by the time dawn was creeping over the rooftops. Go on, said Sariel, her nose pressed against the window. I'll be right behind you. Irialan met him at the base of the stairs. He was still tall, still beautiful, but she thought to herself that she'd never seen him smile like that before. His happiness carved his face wide open, bright and disbelieving, and this time he held his hands out to her. It didn't feel like lightning when she touched him this time, but her heart skipped a beat all the same. His fingers were warm under hers, a little callous from all that writing. They were real, real, real. It was a sensation she would get used to.
Next up, we've got something a little different. A sonnet. We thought it would pair beautifully with our time-stretching romance. This is Shakespeare's Sonnet 12, short, sharp, and very timeless, because, well, it is Shakespeare. This poem reminds us that time is relentless. It ages beauty, it moves fast, it's merciless, but it also challenges us to create something that is very lasting, love and virtue and legacy. Part of the famous Fair Youth sequence, which incorporates all of the sonnets from the 1st to 126th, this poem urges a young man to marry and have children as a way of defying time itself. And while Shakespeare's time and that sort of concept is far from modern, it does hold the sense of love acting in defiance to time, and in that way resonates alongside AnaMaria's story. So here is Sonnet 12, first published in 1609 by Thomas Thorpe, read by B.
Sonnet 12 by William Shakespeare. When I do count the clock that tells the time, and see the brave day sunk in hideous night, when I behold the violet past prime, and sable curls all silvered over with white, when lofty trees I see barren of leaves, which erst from heat did canopy the herd, and summer's green all girded up in sheaves, borne on the bier with white and bristly beard, then of thy beauty do I question make, that thou among the wastes of time must go, since sweets and beauties do themselves forsake, and die as fast as they see others grow, and nothing gainst time's scythe can make the defence, save breed, to brave him when he takes thee hence.
And that's it for today. A little teaser to get you excited for our new Romantic Fantasy series, which will be available to buy next month if you're in the UK, and in May if you're in the US. I do want to mention that we did recently receive our early copies of the books, and they are seriously beautiful, and I'm not even being biased. They have our classic foiled covers and the colourful page edges, but they also include some wonderful illustrations which we selected from an open submissions call. Alas, I cannot show you in audio form, but if you go to our Instagram, Flametree Publishing and Flametree Press, you will see them in real life. They're gorgeous. On the subject of submission calls, make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter as well to hear about the ones we have coming up, or check out the submissions page on our website, flametreepublishing.com. We're really, really proud to be able to publish voices from all over the world, and this Romantic Fantasy series is just another opportunity to do so. More anthologies are coming later this year, so rest assured, you will be well stocked with tall, dark and handsome heroes. So we'll see you next week for an episode which tackles the idea behind creating life. And after that, I promise dragons.
Thanks so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Flametree Myth and Fiction podcast and look forward to the next episode. Do recommend it to your friends. Goodbye for now.